Welcome to Charged Up Studio Live, where small business owners get charged up for success. Are you a small business owner? Do you find yourself struggling through the many responsibilities that come with the title entrepreneur? Well, we're here for you. Charged Up Studio is hosted by Market Atomy LLC, your prescription for what we call OPA. What is OPA? It's when you become so overwhelmed with the confusion that comes with business ownership that you become paralyzed and ultimately avoid doing anything in hopes it will take care of itself, or you put it off till later. Does that sound familiar? I'm your host, Dan Olivo, and each week we bring a business professional eager to charge you up as they talk about the many things that keep you from moving forward with your small business. So are you ready to get charged up for success? Let's hit it. So hello, Charged Up Studio listeners, and welcome back to Charged Up Studio as we kick off our fourth season. This season promises to take things up a notch as we introduce a whole new lineup of experts committed to ensuring that you, the small business owner, get all of the information you need to grow your small business. What better way to kick off this new season than to get the download on what we can expect over the next 12 months and beyond? Our guest this morning is a business economics consultant who loves to connect the dots between economy and business. He's a professor at Duke University and a senior contributor to Forbes. His expertise has contributed to helping with business decisions regarding capital expenditures, staffing, inventory levels, expansions into new markets, pricing, business models, and financial structure. Everything that I am extremely familiar with, but I deliver it on a different way. So let's all give a charged up studio welcome to Mr. Bill Conerly. Hello, Bill.
Hello, Dana. And just one minor correction. I'm not a professor at Duke. That's where I did my PhD in economics.
All right. Sometimes that communication just kind of gets turned around a little bit. But thank you for correcting me. So let's talk a little bit about economics. Just roughly, I deal with SMBs, small and medium business owners, on a daily basis. And one of the hardest things for SMBs to pay attention to is what's happening in the environment around them that could influence their business decisions. So talk a little bit about what the economic outlook for the next year looks like.
Yeah, let me just sort of begin a moment. The economy affects all small businesses. It affects the volume of sales. It affects the ability to get the resources, and that may be employees, or it may be financing, or it could be the materials that like a store would resell. So the economy affects businesses, but boy, it's pretty confusing because there are so many indicators coming at people from all sides. So one of the things we ought to talk about, I'm happy to give you my forecast, but one of the things we ought to talk about is just how a small business sorts through all the information coming. Yeah. But to answer your question, I think that the U.S. economy is in for a recession starting late this year, late 2023 or early 2024. So it's not on our doorstep, but it's coming down the street.
Right. And now is when we need to be planning for this. Okay.
Yeah. I had a friend, if I may interrupt, I had a friend say, when he heard the forecast for late 23 or early 2024, he says, oh, gee, if we're going to have a recession, I'd like to get it over with. And I said, I understand that feeling, but how about using this period to plan what you're going to do when the recession really comes? Right. So considering the fact that we're dealing with small and medium business owners, and you're an economist, and I remember my economy classes in school, okay? And we talked about the bell curve, the demand and supply, and things like that. Let's talk a little bit about how this recession is affecting the demand and supply on the private side and even on the public side. Yeah. Well, one of the first things to keep in mind is that different sectors of the economy are impacted in different magnitudes. So if you are doing new home construction, that is like ground zero. Mortgage rates went up after home prices had already gone up, affordability went down, and people who are in that whole chain, from contractors to realtors, mortgage brokers, title insurance salespeople, they feel like they're in recession right now,
Right.
January of 2023. But if you're in healthcare will probably scoot through without feeling a drop in demand. So one thing to keep in mind is how interest sensitive is my business.
Mhm.
And then there's a timing issue because, like I said, real estate construction has slowed down already. Healthcare has not, but there are going to be ripple effects. The interest sensitive sectors like construction, and not only residential, but non-residential, other interest sensitive sectors like business spending on equipment, machinery, computers. Though when those companies cut back, there'll be ripple effects across the whole economy, and the ripple effects occur last.
Yes.
So a small business owner could think, oh, is my volume of business sensitive to interest rates, or am I going to feel it only when the ripple effects set in across the whole economy?
Well, and getting back to what you're talking about, not only is the economy subjective to interest rates and things like that, but regionally, okay,
Yeah.
regionally has a great deal. I live in Florida. Right now, our construction market, especially on the housing side, is strong.
Yeah.
And it's strong because we have a very low inventory. We don't have enough inventory, to house the people who are coming into Florida. And I would imagine it's the same in Texas, and Phoenix, I think, is another one, and Arizona and Nevada. Those are the four main areas, I think. Even South Dakota, I believe. So regionally, it can, if we're located in Florida, we're not feeling the pinch right now on
Yeah.
certain things. But at the same time, you go to the store. I went to the store the other day, and a carton of eggs have jumped $2.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Eggs in particular have gone up. So
yeah,
I think it's worth thinking in terms of a business cycle going up and down, overlaid on a regional trend. And the Florida, Texas, the states with both low housing costs and low personal income taxes, those are growing. The states with high housing costs and high personal income taxes are shrinking. So we're talking about California, we're talking about Connecticut. Those high tax, high cost states are shrinking. So the business owner should think, oh, is my area shrinking or expanding? But layer on top of that the recession, because eventually the recession will hit almost all parts of the country and most industries, but sooner or later, and lesser or greater magnitudes depending upon the specifics of location and industry.
right.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me, and let's look at it. Let's take a little bit of a sidestep here, okay? When we talk about industries, okay, there's been a lot of reports just recently over the last week and a half. Google, technology industries are laying off like crazy right now. And those layoffs can have a gigantic effect on our businesses if we rely on technology, or if, sorry, or not only that, on our labor force. Okay, we've been talking, the government's been putting out how our labor numbers have been, climbing and things like that. But what they're not taking into consideration are those individuals who have just given up.
Yeah. Well, there's some of that, but let me caution about those headlines. And certainly there have been a lot of headlines of layoffs, IBM, Intel, all sorts of tech companies and non-tech companies as well doing some layoffs. But we are not seeing that in the aggregate total employment data. So one of the good indicators, leading indicators for the overall economy, is how many people are filing their first-time claim for unemployment insurance. And that's not a newspaper headline. That's a hard statistic of somebody went through the process of filing the claims. And they fell last week. They are well below the long-run average. So yeah, it's probably going to increase, but right now we're not seeing it. And one of the interesting bits of information, in most cases, we have trouble separating out what's happening with small business from what's happening with big companies. But we do know that hiring has increased at small businesses. And as I was talking to small business owners last year, they wanted to hire, many of them, but were unable to find people. Well, they're now able to find people, and that is leading the overall economy up. But when a company with 5 employees is able to hire a 6th employee, that does not make the headlines.
Yeah.
But there are so many million small businesses that as they move up, it affects the economy without making headlines. So
Right.
that's something to keep in mind.
Right. Well, and then the other side of the coin is since COVID started, we've had a tremendous increase in new business startups.
Yeah.
Okay. And those new business startups, which is, my biggest concern, because that's what we focus on, is making sure those new business startups have the knowledge base that they need in order to succeed in business.
Right.
Okay. And in order to reduce the number of failed businesses, which we're coming up on that 2-year mark.
Yeah.
All right.
And isn't that a common
It's
time?
a common thing,
right.
So, what Market Atomy, what my company is all about is let's bring that education, the resource management, and the accountability to these small business owners where they can get the information that they can't get right now from the federal government.
Right.
So where do you see, with that in mind, what do you see happening over the next maybe 12 to 18 months as far as the small business, the micro business market, not the
Right.
small business? SBA classifies a small business as 500 employees or less. Those aren't the companies we're talking about. We're talking about 1 to 5 employees or 8 employees.
Yeah. Well, we have evidence that small businesses are more sensitive to business cycles than large companies. They go up higher, they come down lower. So I would expect, I don't see any reason for that to change, but every cycle is a little bit different. But I would expect that small businesses will be hurt more in the recession than the overall economy. But again, it depends on the sector. The contractor with 2 people helping is in a different situation again than somebody who's maybe providing janitorial services for a hospital. I mean, that's probably going to be on there. So I would suggest to small business owners, first of all, think a little bit about what actually drives your volume of business.
Right.
Is it a particular group of consumers? Is it a particular group of other businesses? If you're in the B2B space, what drives your business? What would lead your customer base to have more income or less income, to have to cut back or to be ready to expand? And that's the first step. I would also suggest, and this is maybe jumping ahead of where you wanted the conversation to go, but one of the things we should talk about is contingency planning.
Yeah.
What is a company going to do if hard times hit, and thinking that through ahead of time.
Well, and with that being said, now basic economy says in a period of recession, private sectors tend to cut back and hold back on spending. Public, on the other side, government and everything, they pump more money into the economy.
Yes, but may I?
Yes.
The federal government is likely to try to pump more money in. This time, the politics get a little bit dicey, but it's probably true that the federal government will. State and local governments are a somewhat different story because most state and local governments have to run a balanced budget.
Mm-hmm.
And the economy goes into recession.
They can't print their own money.
They can't print their own money, right? The Fed. They wish they could.
Yes.
But when recession hits, personal income taxes go down, sales taxes revenue goes down, and property tax revenue does not increase as much. But there's a time lag involved because what state and local governments are spending today is based on budgetary decisions that the legislature or the city council made last year. And as a result, there's a time lag. And so state and local government spending will probably drop like a year after the recession hits. So I wouldn't say that the public sector goes up. If you're selling to to government agencies, I would think, okay, first of all, is it federal or is it state and local? And then I'd think about, what's their budget situation going to be in the next fiscal year for which they're spending their money?
Right. One of the things that we are working heavily, aggressively on through our company is introducing these micro businesses to the federal side, as well as the state, municipal, and county side, but more on the federal side, and getting them so that they can show up properly for working with the federal government, either on a no bid situation, a competitive bid situation, or whatever, making sure that they're registered with SAM and SBA and everything else in an effort to prepare them for diversifying their revenue stream.
Yeah.
Because that revenue diversification is what's going to help them mitigate what the recession would have on them. The impact.
Right. And that's probably one of the reasons that the statistics show small business is more volatile, higher highs and lower lows, is the lack of diversification, whereas a large corporation often is selling to various sectors of the economy, public and private, individuals and B2B. So I think diversification is valuable. Of course, then you get into the business strategy of, do we go outside of the area that we really understand in pursuit of diversification? And that's a matter of weighing risks and benefits.
That's a strategic decision that, you really shouldn't be making on your own. You should be, conversing and mind melding is what I call it. Mind melding with others who can give you some input as far as that's concerned. So with that being said, do you see any supply changes coming down the pike that we need to be, such as steel or what do you see coming down the pike that we should be paying attention to in case it might impact?
Yeah, well, the supply chain challenges have hurt a lot of businesses, large and small, and we have labeled these as supply chain issues. And you think about that ship that clogged up the Suez Canal. All right, that is really a supply chain issue. But a lot of the supply chain issues were really labor issues. So I work with a company that uses a lot of brass to make, manufactured products, and their shipment of incoming brass raw material was delayed, and they were getting nervous about having to stop production. So they call up their supplier, get on the phone, and the supplier says, "Your brass is sitting on a truck outside my office. 1,000 miles away from your plant, and I cannot yet find a truck driver to get the brass to you. So it showed up as a supply chain problem, but it was a labor problem. And other companies wanted to increase production of, whether it's, you know, an electronic timer or whether it's something else. Other companies wanted to increase their production to meet demand. I was talking to a woman who runs a manufacturing company in Little Rock, Arkansas, and she says, people are calling wanting my product, and I cannot find workers to add a shift. I'm just barely able to keep the ones I've got, so I cannot increase my production because of labor. And then those other companies said, well, we would increase our production, but we can't get this, you know, this product from Little Rock. So labor is probably the biggest issue for our past supply chain problems, but labor is getting easier. And I am talking to business leaders now specifically about that, running a LinkedIn poll. And what I'm hearing is that for some businesses, they say it's harder than a year ago, but maybe half the businesses say it's easier to hire now than it was a year ago. And about a fourth say it's the same, and a fourth say it's harder. So net, it seems to be getting easier to hire, and that will calm some of the supply chain issues. And then we also had supply chain issues starting with the summer of 2020, you know, the pandemic. People could not take vacations, they could not go out to restaurants, could not go to concerts, so they used their money to buy stuff, things, physical objects that had to, in many cases, come in to the country from overseas, or they had to be produced locally. And, you know, the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach had all these ships at anchor because we were trying to buy more stuff. And we were actually getting more stuff across the docks and loaded into trains and trucks to go into the heartland of America. But we wanted so much stuff, and we were only able to increase a little bit, that we had a clog there.
Yeah.
The supply chain issues on average are getting better. That doesn't mean that anybody listening here is going to have an easier time, but on average, they're getting better. And I believe they're going to get better. But it's worth thinking about a business's supply chain. And now it's hard. The smaller the business, the harder it is. A large corporation can set up multiple suppliers for a given part. You know, the small business typically does not have the volume, but it's worth thinking about what the reliability of a given supplier is. And if the part is crucial to the company, it's worthwhile to pay up for a more reliable supplier. And a lot of companies are trying to buy locally or buy American. And it's not so much a sense of patriotism, but just the reliability of the supply chain. If you order a product and it's going to be 6 months before it gets to you, and then that's subject to interruptions, it's maybe worth paying a little bit more. But so many businesses are under such tight margins that pay more feels bad. So this is another strategic decision of how to organize a critical supply chain.
Right. I know when we went through, I want to say back in 2006, 2004, there was a shortage in steel. Or actually, no, it was back in the early 2000s when I was working down in Brazil. There was a shortage in steel, and evidently, I think it was because of I was down in Brazil preparing for the upcoming Olympics and World Cup games, you know, infrastructurally. And but at the same time, there was a shortage in raw metals and steel because China had bought it all up for the Olympics that they had just recently done, you know, that type deal. So so what do you see moving forward? That what are some of the items that you see, or do you see any that we need to be paying attention to? Do you see any changes in
You mean
supply.
specifically on supply?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, I think the supply chain issue will improve, and a lot of that has to do with labor. And also, as we have rebounded from the pandemic, we're flying, or at least trying to fly, depending upon airline
Yeah.
issues. We're trying to spend our money. And I think we're actually going to see a resurgence of more leisure travel. We're already doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So business travel has not bounced back because we've learned about Zoom.
Yeah.
I did not fly to Orlando for this conversation.
No.
Right. So the shift to back to services for consumer spending and away from goods. I was talking to a group of boat manufacturers last year, and their orders had gone through the roof. People said, okay, I can't vacation in Spain, let's buy a boat.
Yeah.
But I suspect that many of those purchases, whether it's boats or bicycles or blinds for the living room, many of those purchases would have happened anyway, but later on. So people were buying stuff in 2020, 2021, and spilling over into 2022 that they might have bought normally without the pandemic in 23, 24, 25. So some of that spending that helped some companies was just borrowing from the future. And the future is going to come, and it's like, the people who would normally have bought a boat in 2024, they bought it in 2021. Yeah. So I think that the supply chain issue may improve for a bad reason, which is just demand for physical goods goes down. Plus you have a recession, which I think is coming, and that will further diminish demand for discretionary purchases, not so much for, diapers and paper towels, but for the things that, electronic equipment and home furnishings will probably take a hit. And that will help supply chain issues.
Right, exactly. And one of the things, one of the trends that we saw through the pandemic, and is still continuing now to a degree, is that convenience aspect. Okay.
Yeah.
When the pandemic started and we were stuck at home, and things like that, we found out we could get by on less money. And so therefore, we were able to do certain things without having to make the big paychecks.
Yeah. And, I think that varies a lot from family to family.
Yeah.
And I think there's some people doing that. Other people, I think, had the stimulus checks and they were still working. And they said, hey, instead of cooking, let's use Grubhub and get food delivered. I've got kids in there, at an age where, having food delivered makes more sense than cooking it yourself. But I think, and also just the whole ability to shop online as well as to get food delivered, drinks delivered in many areas.
And you're not spending the money on gas that you used to spend.
Right.
I mean, it's gotten to the point where I can go with a tank of gas for almost 3 weeks in my car now.
Right. Yeah.
Because you said, a lot of my meetings are held virtually now.
Yeah.
I'm starting to get out there and do some things, but so what do you think? Let's take a look right now. What is the one thing that business leaders should be thinking top of mind moving forward over the next 12 months?
Yeah. I'm glad you clarified for the next 12 months, because there's a different set of issues if we're thinking 3 to 5 years out.
Exactly.
And we probably ought to
go any farther than 12 months.
All right. 12 months, I would say getting ready for recession.
Yeah.
And like I say, it'll hit different sectors, different times. I suggest a one sheet of paper process where The business leader either sits down alone or maybe with a couple of key managers if they're trusted people in the business, and sketches out on one side of the sheet of paper, hey, if a recession comes, if our sales and orders go down, what will we want to do? And the categories vary from company to company, but they usually include staffing, capital spending, buying equipment or real estate. If products are being sold on credit, and certainly in the business to business space, often shipments are made with payment in 30 days or 90 days. Trade credit standards should be there. How much inventory for businesses that have inventory should we hold? And just sketch out well, first of all, itemize the things that a business might do to help cash flow, to slow the outflow, speed up the inflow, and then circle those items that would be action steps. Some of them you put on the list, but they're trivial. My barbershop sells a little bit of product, but that's kind of trivial. I wouldn't worry about inventory if I were a barbershop. But if I'm a retailer, yeah, you got to worry, or wholesaler, I've got to worry about inventory. So, and then sketch out what you would want to do in each of those cases. And you might sketch out a mild recession idea, a moderate recession idea, severe recession, severe being, hey, the existence of the company is threatened, is at risk. What do we do to survive? And that gives you like a set of action steps.
Right.
And Dana, I think that creating this list now, where most companies are kind of relaxed, is going to have two significant benefits. The first is, if we've thought it through ahead of time, we'll respond faster.
Right.
So I was writing this book, The Flexible Stance, Thriving in a Boom Bust Economy. And as I was thinking about businesses that survive recession, I called up friends of mine who were bankers, and I was in the banking industry for a while, and people had been loan officers or workout officers, special credits, they call it. And I said, hey, what's the difference between a company that survives the recession and a company that does not survive a recession? What have you seen in your experience? And the most common answer I got was the companies that survive took action promptly.
Yeah. The
companies that failed, they didn't want to cut staff. They didn't want to cut, this or that. They hoped that things would change, and they did not take action early enough. So that's the first benefit, but there's a second benefit. And the second benefit is, if you're not in crisis now and you think through, what will we do if bad times come? Then you can make decisions that reflect the company's long-term vision, goals, and values. Whereas if you're panicked, you're not making payroll, or on the corporate level, you're not meeting Wall Street expectations. But back to the small business, you're not meeting payroll. You've got a bank loan and you may not be able to pay it. You may have leased some equipment that's going to be pulled back. You may be kicked out of your office space.
Right.
In those conditions, most humans do not make their best decisions. But if they've thought it through ahead of time, they can say, okay, this is the plan. And when it comes time to implement the plan, to pull the trigger, there'll probably be adjustments needed from when you did this exercise. That's fine. But most of the steps will probably still be valid.
Right.
And a little bit of tweaking, and in a day or two, snap the fingers, implement the plan. And that's a key to surviving.
Okay.
And at some point in this conversation, we ought to talk about how to set a company up to thrive in the rebound, because there's another set of steps there.
Well, let's do that first before we move on to that section. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about, if you're going to sit down and you're going to start thinking about and planning what you're going to do. What are 5 top things you should be considering during the planning process?
Yeah, I'm going to say staffing, capital spending, inventories if you have inventories, who you extend credit to and under what terms. And let me elaborate on that. I think the others are kind of obvious, but if you have a salesperson, that salesperson in a recession is likely going to come in and say to the boss, we need to have easier credit terms because our sales are down, we need to sell more. Our competitors are offering easier terms, delayed payment, and we'll finance it, we'll carry it for a marginal credit. So there's a tendency to want to ease your credit terms as business goes down, but that is exactly the worst time to ease credit terms. If anything, you have to tighten. If a company is being late on payment, no, let's not ship more product. And
what about if you were to offer, say, third-party financing so that you got paid up front?
Yeah.
Okay, and let the credit company worry about collecting.
I like that. And that's not the thing that comes to my economist mind. And that's why somebody like you or other, it's worth talking to bankers, accountants, other small business owners, as well as consultants to get some ideas here that, an economist may not come up with, but I like that. And some companies find that leasing equipment for that reason is a little bit better than purchasing.
Yeah, and one of the things I tell my clients is if you're going to go into debt for revenue generation. Okay, so make sure that the money that you borrow is going towards making more money,
as opposed to just paying past old bills.
Exactly. So let's talk about, okay, we get through the recession.
Yeah.
How do we scale? How do we move forward?
Yeah. There's an interesting story about the Caterpillar company, the big yellow machines, and they did some upside contingency planning. So, I suggested one sheet of paper. And, you have a sheet of paper, but then you turn it over and there's a backside and you think through what are the challenges we will face in the upside. And Caterpillar did that after the 2008, 2009. They actually did that going into the recession. What are the challenges we're going to face? And oftentimes they call it a bullwhip effect, where businesses had falling sales, so they cut their inventories, and then sales rebound in the recovery, and dealers are placing orders. This is the Caterpillar story. Dealers are placing orders with Caterpillar, both for the products they're selling, to replace the products they're selling, but the dealers also want to carry more inventory, and so Caterpillar is seeing two reasons to boost production. And some of their vendors, some of their suppliers to Caterpillar are small businesses that just could not scale up that fast. So ahead of time, Caterpillar said to its small business vendors, hey, are you going to be able to scale up quickly? Now, the average small business is not in that position, but the process of let's think through what are our challenges. And there are some challenges, but let me tell you a couple of stories of companies that I saw thrive in recoveries, surprisingly so. There was a company, I think in Arizona, that told me that they had done a great job of growing market share in the recession. And they're a wholesaler of fasteners, nuts, bolts, rivets, that kind of stuff. Their customers are primarily construction contractors and manufacturers. And those are very cyclical parts of the economy. So I'm like, oh man, you must have had a lousy time in the recession. And they said, well, what we did was we prioritized having inventory. And, I was just saying, hey, watch inventory, but they wanted to have things in stock. And the people who were still doing business were calling up their usual supplier. I need a 3 1/8 inch concrete lag bolt. And their supplier was saying, oh, we're out of stock of that. So they called the other wholesalers, and they found that this company always had the stuff in stock. So pretty soon, those contractors didn't call their old vendor. They called the outfit that always had it in stock. And that company, their volume didn't really grow during the recession, but then it blossomed because all these people were used to calling whatever the company was. So that's a good story. And then there's another story, and it starts in your town of Orlando. I'm on a plane flying from Orlando to Atlanta, and then I'm going to head off to my home in Portland, Oregon. And the woman sitting next to me was headed to Dublin, Ireland. She had been in Orlando for a hair products show, and she explained to me that she had 3 beauty salons in Dublin, and this was a great show for weaves and wigs and extensions and that stuff. And I was afraid she was going to tell me all about these hair products, which I was not very interested in. But she asked me what I did. I mentioned I'm an economist, and she said that she told me her recession story. And this was a couple of years after the 2008-2009 recession. She said the recession was the best thing that ever happened to her business. I looked down at my tray table to see how many drinks I'd had, because maybe, how can a recession be good? But her story was, in the good times before the recession, she was in sort of middle quality locations and aspired to having top quality locations in wealthier neighborhoods with better traffic going by the place. But she wasn't ready to pull the trigger on the high rents. So she built up her cash and waited, didn't know what she was waiting for. She was just couldn't bring herself to pay those rents. When the recession came, she bided her time a little bit, saw some great locations that had been empty for 6 months, went to the landlord and say, hey, you've got a location there. Nobody is in it. Nobody's paying your rent. And when I go by, I don't see anybody touring the property. She says, I could maybe take that from you, sign a lease, but it would have to be at a current appropriate rental rate.
Yeah, something's better than nothing. So, and you're seeing a lot of that with COVID. I mean, with the pandemic, you're seeing a lot of commercial spaces. Commercial companies have decreased their amount of square footage.
Yeah,
right. and more square footage is available at a lower rate.
Yeah. So I told her a story about the McKinsey consulting firm, one of the big global consulting firms. They did a study of multinational corporations, I mean, huge companies. And they said, what do the top 20% of multinational companies do differently than the bottom 80%? Evaluated at over like a 20-year average profitability. And the best companies are cautious in the boom. They're cautious in the boom when everybody else is eager and enthusiastic and optimistic, and they build up their financial resources. Then in the bust, they start buying. That's when they acquire other companies or property. And so I would suggest to small businesses, you want to go into the recovery with some cash if you possibly can. And this is a good time to think, what would I want to do if there's a lot of distress? Maybe I want to move into a new territory, and there's going to be somebody selling a business because they've gone bankrupt. Maybe I want more real estate or more equipment. Maybe I can pick it up cheap from somebody who's gone bust. The hairdresser bought inventory from the bankrupt salons at cents on the dollar or pennies on the euro, whatever. And there's a company I work with in Seattle, Washington, that wants to expand. They have a lot of technical employees, but they don't want to get in a bidding war now when business is good to get those people. So they are being in touch with the folks they would like to hire now, but they're not offering them huge salaries. But the idea is when a recession comes to their sector, they know who they want to hire. And if those people are working at companies that are cutting back, either doing layoffs or just maybe not paying bonuses and trimming benefits, this company knows who they want to hire. So there are some strategies to set a business up to come out in the rebound stronger than ever before.
Yeah, one thing that has not been mentioned here is strategically partnering to expand your product offerings or your geographic area. That's a less expensive way of gaining more market share and more being able to expand your product lines horizontally and vertically. So that's another thing there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't have a good anecdote on that, but I think it's a plausible strategy. And again, it gets into the how far away from our old knitting, stick to the knitting, how far away from that we ought to go. But I have been in companies and I've seen, they sell this, but they're also selling that. Yeah. And sometimes a product extension makes sense.
When you think about it, by strategically partnering, you can be building a funnel system that may lead to one of your products that you can't enter the market with, So this strategic partner may have a product that they can funnel into your product, and you're just sharing revenue streams. So,
right. And that may very well be a lot cheaper than developing a new product yourself.
New product or hiring new staff or anything like that. So, but the key is, in order to survive not only this upcoming recession, but also after, in the recovery period, is knowing your cash flow. And knowing where you're going to get that cash flow. That's going to be your number one concern. If you have to factor, if you have to, provide third-party financing, if you, what was I thinking? When you have contracts, you can go to the bank, use the contracts as collateral.
Sure.
Those kind of things. So,
I was chatting with a friend who's an accountant turned CFO for a mid-sized company and now a consultant. And I said, how many companies have good cash flow forecasts? And he says, well, the small businesses he works with, they watch their checkbook very carefully. Checkbook, sort of a metaphor for short-term cash. They watch their checkbook fairly carefully, and they have a decent idea of what's going out and what's coming in. But he observed that they don't pay enough attention to the balance sheet. And I don't know if this is true, but he says inventory is a balance sheet item. Accounts receivable. You don't see that on the monthly profit and loss, but it's something to look at, and it bears attention, especially as we go into weaker economy, following up on those accounts receivable.
Right.
A friend of mine who's a private equity investor was telling me that they bought a company that maybe 50 million in annual sales, and they found that the billing process, cutting invoices, was so backed up that they often wouldn't bill people for 30 days after the product or service was delivered.
Wow.
And that just speeding up to make sure that the day or the next day the invoice goes out sped up. And then, nobody likes to do collections, but, following up on people who are not paying on time, in many cases, it's just a simple error or delay. It's on a stack of papers, particularly if you're dealing with small businesses. And then on that subject, there are some large corporations that are, routinely paying their bills in 120 days, but often they're flexible.
Yeah.
If you find the
Or
right
just-
person to say, and you say, hey, I'm a small business, I just, I've got to pay wages on time. That's the law. I've got to pay for my inputs promptly because I'm, dealing with small businesses that'll go out of business if I try to, delay it 120 days. If you want me to ship this product, you just have to pay faster.
Right. Or at least collect your expenses up front.
Yeah, that's another
At
option
least
to
do
consider.
that. Yeah. And no, especially when you're on the manufacturing or the distribution side where you've got a 90, 120 day delay between payments, delivery and payments. So those are the kind of things that should be taken into consideration. Cash flow is the fastest way for you to start getting into trouble, when it comes
or lack of cash flow.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Lack of cash flow. Fastest way to do. Yeah.
And I do a lot of presentations to corporate boards and trade associations, and they're almost entirely honest people. They say, hey, they're going to pay a fee and my expenses, but I sure like to have a deposit up front before I spend $1,000 on a plane ticket to go to wherever I'm supposed to go. It's like, I shouldn't be laying out money before they're laying out money.
Yeah, no, that's
and
it. Or let them pay your ticket, let them buy your ticket. So
it's there's a lot to be said for making sure that the customer has skin in the game.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, we're coming up on the end of another podcast here, and I could keep going on with Bill here. I'm very much, as a strategist, I'm always looking ahead. I'm always looking at the environment around us, those kind of things. So this is exciting to me. Bill, before you sign off, can you have any last minute tips or anything for our listeners?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to do a little contingency planning. Both sides of a piece of paper. What would you want to do if your sales or orders start declining? And what do you want to do if you think those sales and orders are going to go up? And I suggest this be an annual exercise. And it does not need to be a 3-ring binder exercise, probably should not be. Although sometimes I say, they might hire a consultant to do it if it's a 3-ring binder exercise. But even I think big companies can do it on one sheet of paper, one side for the down side and the reverse side of the paper for upside contingency plans. Think ahead. And the other thing is, there's a lot of value in talking with other small business owners.
Yes.
And when you can find a trusted group, I have 6 people who are independent consultants, speakers, trainers, coaches, and we get together every month for a few hours and share successes and failures. Hey, I think I messed up. I don't know how I could have done it better, but I had a bad result here. And people start telling me, and I would suggest, get in a mastermind group, find people to talk over your challenges with.
Are really great when, especially as a small business owner, being able to, talk amongst other small business owners and share experiences, lessons learned, things like that. We run one on a regular basis, twice a month right now, with small business owners, especially small business owners who are pursuing federal contracts.
Yeah. And, a typical small business owner will run into other small business owners, either in a business transaction or, a chamber of commerce meeting. But, people tend to put on a happy face in those casual conversations.
Oh, yeah.
But where you get benefit is you get to know the people, and you let your hair down, and you're honest about your successes, but you're also honest about your failures, and being, willing to say, hey, I messed up. How do I prevent this from happening again?
Yeah.
We'll pay dividends.
No, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Well, this has been Charged Up Studio with your host, Dana Olivo, and we come every week on Tuesdays. If you are interested in checking out Bill, you can reach them how?
Conerlyconsulting.com, but you don't have to worry about whether you spell it right. Just take your best guess at Conerly, Conerly. But even if you get it wrong, Mr. Google knows how to find me, Conerly Consulting. And I have a book, The Flexible Stance, Thriving in a Boom-Bust Economy. You can get it from my website or from Mr. Amazon. And I'd be happy also to take email questions from anybody listening here. Just say that you were listening to this great podcast, so I can separate your email from the groupies and stalkers who so bedevil handsome young economists.
Well, thank you, Bill. Once again, this is Dana Olivo. I wish you all a great week, and go out and have another charged up week. Talk to you later. You've been listening to Charged Up Studio Live, the podcast with you, the small business owner, in mind, with your host, Dana Olivo. Join us every Tuesday as we bring you valuable tips and insights into many of the topics you don't know about growing a successful business. Please leave us a review on any of the streaming platforms you are listening to, or visit us on the YouTube or Facebook page and leave a review or subscribe so you don't miss another episode. You can also support us through Patreon by visiting our website, chargedupstudio.live, and click on the Patreon link. Until next week, go out and have a charged up week.